The fluorescent lights of Meridian Financial's 42nd floor cast harsh shadows across the conference room table, making the quarterly projections look even worse than they actually were. Sarah Chun adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and stared at the numbers that represented 18 months of her life's work slowly circling the drain. Her fintech startup, InvestSmart, had shown such promise during its initial launch phase. The algorithm she'd developed could predict market trends with 87% accuracy, something that should have made her company invaluable to institutional investors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Instead, she was sitting in a glass-walled room watching three men in identical navy suits explain why her company wasn't worth their continued investment. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being told her financial predictions were unreliable by people who had missed the last three major market corrections. "Miss Chun," said Richard Blackwood, Meridian's senior partner, his voice carrying the kind of condescension that came from decades of believing his own press releases. "While your technology shows potential, we're concerned about market penetration rates. Your user acquisition costs are simply too high for sustainable growth." Sarah bit back her first response, which would have involved pointing out that Meridian had acquired users primarily through acquisition of competitors rather than organic growth. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact. "The acquisition costs reflect our focus on quality users rather than quantity. Our average customer lifetime value is 43% higher than industry standard." "Nevertheless," interrupted Marcus Webb, Blackwood's younger but equally arrogant partner, "the board feels that without significant strategic partnerships, InvestSmart lacks the infrastructure necessary for scaling operations." The third man, Thomas Morrison, had been silent throughout most of the meeting, occasionally making notes on his tablet. He was newer to Meridian, brought in specifically for his expertise in emerging technologies. Sarah had researched him thoroughly before this meeting and knew he'd successfully launched two previous fintech companies before selling them to larger corporations. His presence here suggested that Meridian was at least taking her seriously, even if they were about to crush her. "Dreams? What kind of partnerships are you referring to?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Blackwood smiled the way a shark might smile before attacking. "We're prepared to offer continued funding, but we'd need to restructure the arrangement. Meridian would take a controlling interest in InvestSmart, and you'd transition to a senior developer role. We have extensive experience in scaling operations." Sarah felt her stomach drop. A senior developer role meant giving up control of her own creation, watching other people make decisions about the company she'd built from nothing. It meant becoming an employee of her own startup, taking orders from people who understood spreadsheets, but had never written a line of code or dealt with the complexities of algorithm development. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I believe InvestSmart's value lies precisely in its current structure. The algorithm requires constant refinement based on market feedback, something that can only be done effectively by someone who understands both the technical architecture and the financial principles underlying the system." Morrison finally spoke up, his voice quieter than his colleagues, but somehow carrying more weight. "Miss Chun, what would you say is your biggest operational challenge right now?" It was an interesting question, different from the confrontational approach the other two had taken. Sarah considered her answer carefully. Honestly, finding the right business partner. Someone who understands both the technical side and the financial markets well enough to help navigate expansion without losing sight of what makes the platform unique. "And you haven't found anyone suitable?" "The people who understand the technology don't understand the business side. The people who understand business want to change the technology into something more conventional and less effective." Sarah realized she was being more honest than she'd intended. But something about Morrison's direct questioning made her want to give real answers. Blackwood cleared his throat impatiently, which brings us back to our original offer. Meridian has the business expertise to guide InvestSmart's development while you focus on what you do best. Sarah looked around the room, taking in the expensive furniture, the view of downtown Chicago stretching out beyond the windows, the subtle displays of wealth and power that were meant to intimidate. These men had built their careers on acquiring promising companies and either maximizing their short-term value or stripping them for parts. They saw InvestSmart as another acquisition opportunity, not as a revolutionary approach to financial technology. "I need some time to consider your proposal," she said, standing up and gathering her presentation materials. "Of course," Blackwood replied, though his tone suggested he considered this a formality. "We'll need an answer by Friday." As Sarah rode the elevator down 42 floors, she realized that Blackwood's deadline gave her exactly 4 days to find an alternative to losing control of her company. 4 days to find the kind of business partner she'd been searching for unsuccessfully for the past year. The elevator opened into the marble-floored lobby of Meridian Financial, all glass and steel and carefully orchestrated impressions of success. Sarah walked through it, feeling like she was escaping from something rather than leaving a business meeting. Outside, the Chicago wind whipped between the skyscrapers with the kind of intensity that made November feel personal. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend and roommate, Jessica Rodriguez, asking how the meeting went. Sarah stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Could be better. Tell you tonight." The walk back to her office gave her time to think. InvestSmart operated out of a converted warehouse in the River North District, sharing space with a dozen other startups, freelance developers, and creative agencies. The rent was reasonable, the internet was fast, and nobody cared if she worked until 3 in the morning, which she'd been doing increasingly often lately. Her company occupied a corner section of the building's 3rd floor, partitioned off with movable walls that she'd decorated with whiteboards, covered in algorithm flowcharts and market analysis graphs. 2 junior developers, Kevin Park and Amanda Williams, worked at standing desks surrounded by multiple monitors displaying real-time market data and code repositories. "How did it go?" Kevin asked without looking up from his screen. He was debugging a section of code that interfaced with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange's data feeds, work that required the kind of concentration that didn't appreciate interruptions. "They want to buy us out and make me an employee," Sarah said. Dropping into her chair and immediately pulling up her email. Amanda spun around in her chair, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "Are you going to take it?" "Not if I can help it." Sarah scrolled through messages from potential clients, partnership inquiries, and the usual collection of spam from companies promising to revolutionize her business with their synergistic solutions. "We have until Friday to find a better option." "What kind of better option?" Kevin asked, finally looking away from his code. Sarah leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling where someone had painted a mural of the Chicago skyline. "The kind that doesn't exist yet. A business partner who understands what we're trying to accomplish and has the resources to help us scale without taking over." She spent the rest of the day reviewing her options, which were disappointingly limited. Traditional venture capital firms wanted controlling interests and board seats. Angel investors either didn't understand the technology or wanted to change it into something more familiar. Strategic partnerships with larger financial institutions inevitably involved giving up the independence that made InvestSmart innovative. In the first place, by 6 o'clock, Kevin and Amanda had left for the day, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and a growing sense that she was about to lose everything she'd worked for. She pulled up the original business plan she'd written 2 years ago, back when InvestSmart was just an idea and a few thousand lines of experimental code. The plan had been ambitious but straightforward. Create an artificial intelligence system that could analyze market patterns, social media sentiment, economic indicators, and breaking news to predict short-term market movements with unprecedented accuracy. The challenge wasn't just the technical complexity of building such a system, but creating something that actual investors would trust with their money. She'd spent 6 months perfecting the algorithm, another 6 months testing it with her own limited resources, and the past year trying to convince people that it worked better than anything currently available. The results spoke for themselves. In controlled testing, InvestSmart had outperformed every major trading algorithm by significant margins. Real-world applications with beta users had generated an average return of 23% annually, compared to the market average of 11%. But success in testing didn't translate automatically to success in business. She was learning the hard way. Her phone rang, interrupting her brooding. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize with a Chicago area code. InvestSmart, this is Sarah. Miss Chun? This is Daniel Crawford from Crawford & Associates. I understand you're looking for strategic partnership opportunities. Sarah straightened in her chair. She'd never heard of Crawford & Associates, but someone had obviously done their research to know she was seeking partnerships. That's correct. What kind of association does Crawford & Associates represent? We're a private investment firm focused on emerging financial technologies. I've been following InvestSmart's development for several months, and I'd like to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. This was either very good timing or very suspicious timing. Sarah had learned to be cautious about unsolicited calls from investment firms, especially ones that claimed to have been following her company. How did you hear about InvestSmart? Your presentation at the FinTech Innovation Conference last spring caught my attention. The predictive accuracy rates you demonstrated were impressive enough that I've been monitoring your progress since then. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah remembered that presentation. It had been one of her better efforts, clearly explaining the technology without getting lost in technical details. The audience had seemed engaged, and she'd received several business cards afterward, though none had led to meaningful partnerships. What kind of collaboration are you thinking about? She asked. I'd prefer to discuss that in person, if you're willing. Would you be available for dinner tomorrow evening? I think you'll find our approach different from traditional investment models. Sarah hesitated. Her experience with investment firms had taught her to be skeptical of anyone who promised to be different. But with Meridian's deadline looming, she couldn't afford to ignore potential alternatives. Where did you have in mind? Alinea, 8 o'clock. I'll make the reservation under Crawford. Alinea was one of Chicago's most expensive restaurants, the kind of place where making a reservation required advanced planning and serious financial resources. Either Crawford & Associates was very successful, or Daniel Crawford was trying to impress her with an extravagant gesture. I'll be there, she said. After hanging up, Sarah spent an hour researching Crawford & Associates online. The company had a professional website listing expertise in financial technology investments, venture capital, and strategic business development. Daniel Crawford's biography described him as a former investment banker with experience in emerging markets and technology startups. The firm claimed to have successfully launched 12 companies over the past 5 years. Everything looked legitimate, but something about the timing bothered her. How had Crawford known she was actively seeking partnerships? The FinTech conference had been 6 months ago, and she hadn't been publicizing her search for business partners. Either Crawford had very good industry connections, or someone had told him about her meeting with Meridian that night over Chinese takeout in their shared apartment. Sarah explained the situation to Jessica, who worked as a marketing director for a downtown advertising agency and had a talent for reading people's motivations. So this mysterious Daniel Crawford calls you the same day you get an ultimatum from Meridian Financial? Jessica said, expertly handling chopsticks while navigating lo mein noodles. That's either an incredible coincidence or very deliberate. Timing. That's what I thought. But what's the alternative? Meridian's offer is basically surrender disguised as partnership. What do you know about this Crawford guy besides what's on his company website? Nothing, which is part of what bothers me. Usually when someone's been following my company for months, I've at least heard their name mentioned somewhere. Jessica considered this while eating. You know what? I think you should go to dinner, but treat it like reconnaissance. Find out what he really wants and why he's approaching you now. Worst case scenario, you get a very expensive meal and confirm that he's not legitimate. Best case, maybe he's exactly what you're looking for. Sarah spent the following day trying to focus on work while preparing for her evening meeting. She reviewed InvestSmart's financial projections, practiced explaining the algorithm's methodology, and researched recent trends in fintech investments. By 7 o'clock, she was as ready as she could be for whatever Daniel Crawford had in mind. Alina occupied a converted townhouse in Lincoln Park, its minimalist exterior giving no hint of the culinary theater that waited inside. Sarah arrived exactly on time, wearing her best business suit and carrying a leather portfolio containing InvestSmart's complete presentation materials. The hostess led her to a table in a quiet corner, where a man in his early 30s was already seated, studying what appeared to be a tablet displaying financial charts. He looked up as she approached, and Sarah's first impression was that he seemed younger than she'd expected for someone running an investment firm. Daniel Crawford stood to greet her, extending his hand with a confident smile. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair and green eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His handshake was firm without being aggressive, and his suit was expensive without being ostentatious. Miss Chun, thank you for joining me. I hope you don't mind that I took the liberty of ordering wine. The sommelier recommended something that pairs well with their tasting menu. Sarah accepted the seat he pulled out for her, noting that he'd chosen a table position to give them privacy for business discussion while still being visible, enough to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Either he was naturally considerate or very experienced in conducting business dinners with professional women. Please call me Sarah, and thank you for choosing such an impressive venue. I have to admit, this is significantly more elaborate than most of my business meetings. Daniel smiled, and Sarah noticed that it seemed genuine rather than practiced. I believe that if you're going to discuss something important, the setting should reflect that importance. Besides, I've been wanting to try this place for months, and it seemed like a perfect opportunity. The server approached to explain the evening's menu, a complex progression of small courses designed to showcase innovative cooking techniques. Sarah usually preferred straightforward food, but she found herself curious about the artistic presentations being described. So, she said after they'd made their selections, tell me about Crawford and Associates. Your website mentions 12 successful launches, but it doesn't provide much detail about your investment philosophy. Daniel leaned back slightly, his expression becoming more serious. We focus on companies that have developed genuinely innovative approaches to established markets. Not just technological improvements, but fundamental rethinking of how problems can be solved. That's fairly broad. What makes you different from traditional venture capital? Traditional VC firms are portfolio managers. They invest in multiple companies with the expectation that one or two will succeed spectacularly while others provide modest returns or fail entirely. We prefer to work intensively with fewer companies, providing not just capital but strategic guidance and operational support. The first course arrived, something involving molecular gastronomy that transformed familiar flavors into unexpected textures. Sarah found herself impressed despite her usual preference for simpler food. What kind of operational support? She asked. That depends on what the company needs. Sometimes it's access to distribution networks, sometimes it's regulatory. Expertise, sometimes it's simply having someone with experience who can help navigate scaling challenges. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of the kind of condescension she'd encountered with other potential investors. Instead, she saw what appeared to be genuine interest in her response. InvestSmart's main challenge isn't technical, she said. The algorithm works better than anything currently available. The challenge is convincing institutional investors to trust something new, especially something developed by a small independent company. Trust is earned through results, but results require opportunity to demonstrate capability. It's a classic catch-22 in emerging technology. Sarah was surprised by how accurately he'd summarized her situation. Most people she'd spoken with either didn't understand the trust issue or proposed solutions that missed the point entirely. Exactly. I can show backtesting results and controlled environment performance, but what institutional investors really want is a track record with real money. Under management. How much capital would you need to build that track record? It was a direct question, the kind that usually led to negotiations about equity stakes and control structures. Sarah decided to give an equally direct answer. $2 million for the first phase. That would allow us to expand our user base, refine the algorithm based on larger data sets, and build the kind of performance history that institutional clients require. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. And what would you want from a business partner besides capital? Industry connections, regulatory guidance, and someone who understands both the technology and the market well enough to help make strategic decisions, without trying to fundamentally change what makes the system effective. What would you not want from a business partner? Sarah laughed, recognizing that he was asking her to define her boundaries. Someone who wants to take control of the company, change the core technology to something more conventional, or treat this as a short-term investment opportunity. Those seem like reasonable requirements. What made you decide to start InvestSmart in the first place? The question shifted the conversation from business strategy to personal motivation, something Sarah hadn't expected. She found herself explaining how her background in both computer science and economics had led her to see inefficiencies in traditional investment approaches, and how she'd become convinced that artificial intelligence could process information in ways that human analysts simply couldn't match. Most people think of trading algorithms as black boxes that make decisions based on mathematical formulas, she said. But InvestSmart is different. It learns from market behavior, adapts to changing conditions, and provides transparency about why it makes specific recommendations. That's what caught my attention at the conference. Most algorithmic trading systems are essentially sophisticated versions of technical analysis. Yours seemed to incorporate fundamental analysis, sentiment analysis, and predictive modeling in ways I hadn't seen before. Sarah was impressed that he remembered specific details from her presentation 6 months earlier. Either he had an exceptional memory, or he'd been genuinely interested in her work. The key insight was realizing that market movements are influenced by human psychology as much as economic fundamentals. Traditional algorithms ignore the psychological component, but InvestSmart incorporates social media sentiment, news analysis, and behavioral pattern recognition. How do you prevent the system from being manipulated by artificial sentiment or false information? It was a sophisticated question, one that demonstrated understanding of both the technology and the potential vulnerabilities. Sarah found herself explaining the multi-layered verification systems she'd built into the algorithm, designed to distinguish between genuine market sentiment and manufactured opinion. The conversation continued through multiple courses, ranging from technical discussions about machine learning applications to broader questions about the future of financial technology. Sarah realized that she was enjoying herself more than she'd expected, partly because Daniel seemed genuinely interested in understanding her work, rather than simply evaluating its profit potential. "I have to ask," she said during dessert, "how Did you know I was looking for partnership opportunities right now? The timing of your call was remarkably coincidental." Daniel smiled, and for the first time that evening, he seemed slightly uncomfortable. "I may have heard through industry connections that you were meeting with Meridian Financial. Word travels quickly in Chicago's investment community, especially when it involves innovative companies. What else did you hear?" "That Meridian made you an offer that would essentially require giving up control of InvestSmart in exchange for continued funding." Sarah felt a chill of realization. "You know what they offered me? I know Meridian's typical approach to acquisitions. They're not particularly creative in their deal structures." She studied his face, trying to determine whether his knowledge represented helpful industry insight or concerning intelligence gathering. "Why are you really interested in InvestSmart?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his response. Carefully, "Because I've been looking for exactly the kind of company you've built. Not just the technology, though that's impressive. The approach, the philosophy, the understanding that innovation requires independence. And you happened to find me just when I needed to find you? Sometimes timing works out better than it should. The question is whether you're interested in exploring what collaboration might look like." Sarah realized that the evening had reached its crucial moment. She could continue being cautious, ask for references and additional information, and probably spend another week researching Daniel Crawford and his company. Or she could acknowledge that she'd been impressed by his understanding of her work, his approach to business partnership, and his apparent willingness to support her vision rather than reshape it. "What would be the next step?" she asked. "I'd like to visit your office, meet your team, and see InvestSmart in operation. If what I see matches what we've discussed tonight, I think we should explore a formal partnership proposal." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. After months of unsuccessful meetings with potential investors, she'd finally found someone who seemed to understand what she was trying to accomplish. But something about the situation still felt too convenient, too perfectly timed. "When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow afternoon, if that works for you. I believe in making decisions quickly when the opportunity is right." As they left the restaurant, Sarah found herself walking beside someone who might be the business partner she'd been searching for, or who might be something else entirely. The next 24 hours would determine which possibility was true, and whether InvestSmart's future would involve partnership or simply a more sophisticated form of acquisition. The Chicago wind had calmed since earlier in the evening, and the downtown lights reflected off Lake Michigan in patterns that seemed almost algorithmic in their complexity. Sarah realized that she was about to find out whether Daniel Crawford was the solution to her problems, or simply a more complicated version of the same challenge she'd been facing all along. The next morning arrived with the kind of gray November sky that made Chicago feel like it was wearing a wool blanket. Sarah stood in front of her bedroom mirror, debating between professional outfits while her mind raced through everything that could go wrong during Daniel Crawford's visit to InvestSmart. She'd barely slept, alternating between excitement about finding a potential partner and anxiety about whether this opportunity was too good to be true. Jessica emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee, already dressed for her own workday in the sharp blazer and heels that marked her as someone who understood corporate presentation. "You're overthinking this," she said, handing Sarah the larger mug. "Wear the navy dress with the structured jacket. It says I'm professional, but I'm not trying to impress you. What if he's working with Meridian somehow? What if this whole thing is some elaborate setup to get me to reveal proprietary information about the algorithm? Then you'll figure it out and shut it down." "But Sarah, you've been looking for the right business partner for over a year. At some point, you have to take calculated risks." Sarah pulled on the navy dress Jessica had recommended, then stared at her reflection while fastening her watch. The face looking back at her showed someone who'd learned to project confidence even when facing uncertainty. a skill developed through countless presentations to skeptical investors and dismissive venture capitalists. "I keep thinking about what he said about timing. How did he know exactly when to call? Maybe he has good sources. Maybe he's been waiting for the right moment to approach you. Or maybe," Jessica grinned, "the universe finally decided to cut you a break." An hour later, Sarah was at her desk reviewing InvestSmart's latest performance metrics when Kevin arrived carrying a bag of pastries from the bakery downstairs. He distributed Danish and croissants while updating her on overnight algorithm performance and system maintenance. "The European markets gave us some interesting data points," he said, pulling up charts on his primary monitor. "The Brexit uncertainty created volatility patterns that the algorithm handled better than I expected. We're seeing prediction accuracy rates above 90% for short-term currency fluctuations." Sarah studied the charts, noting how InvestSmart had correctly anticipated market movements that had caught traditional analysts off guard. This was exactly the kind of performance that should attract serious investors. Yet most of the people she'd pitched seemed more interested in changing her approach than supporting it. Amanda arrived shortly after, immediately diving into code reviews for the user interface improvements they'd been developing. The new dashboard design would make InvestSmart more accessible to institutional clients while maintaining the analytical depth that sophisticated users required. "I finished the compliance reporting module last night," Amanda announced. "Now, we can generate audit trails that meet SEC requirements for institutional trading oversight." "Perfect timing," Sarah replied. "We might need to demonstrate regulatory compliance sooner than expected." She briefed her team on Daniel Crawford's visit without revealing her desperate need for alternative funding sources. Both Kevin and Amanda were talented developers who could find new positions easily if InvestSmart failed. But Sarah felt responsible for protecting their careers while she navigated the company's uncertain future. At 11 o'clock, she called Meridian Financial's main number and asked to speak with Thomas Morrison, the partner who'd seemed most interested in understanding InvestSmart's technology during yesterday's meeting. "Mr. Morrison, this is Sarah Chun from InvestSmart. I wanted to follow up on yesterday's discussion, of course. Have you had time to consider our proposal?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I'm still evaluating options. I was wondering if you could tell me more about Meridian's typical involvement in day-to-day operations after acquisition. We generally prefer to let technical teams focus on development, while our business operations specialists handle strategic planning, marketing, and client relations." It was exactly what she'd feared. Meridian's version of partnership involved relegating her to a purely technical role, while other people made decisions about InvestSmart's future direction. "I see. And what about input on product development? Priorities?" "Those decisions would be made at the board level, taking into account market research and profitability projections." Sarah thanked Morrison and ended the call, feeling more certain than ever that Meridian's offer represented everything she wanted to avoid. They saw InvestSmart as a technology asset to be optimized for profit rather than a revolutionary approach to financial analysis. Daniel Crawford arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, carrying a leather messenger bag and wearing a different expensive suit that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable. Sarah met him in the building's industrial-style lobby, noting that he seemed genuinely interested in the converted warehouse's architecture and the creative energy of the various startups operating throughout the space. "This is exactly the kind of environment I'd expect for innovative technology development," he said as they rode the freight elevator to the 3rd floor. "Much more conducive to creative thinking than traditional office buildings." Sarah led him through the open workspace, pointing out the various companies sharing the floor before reaching InvestSmart's partitioned corner. Kevin and Amanda looked up from their workstations as they approached, and Sarah performed introductions with the kind of casual professionalism that suggested a comfortable team dynamic. Kevin handles the back-end infrastructure and data processing systems, she explained. Amanda focuses on user interface design and regulatory compliance features. Daniel shook hands with both developers, asking intelligent questions about their backgrounds and specific contributions to InvestSmart's development. Sarah appreciated that he treated her team members as valuable professionals rather than simply technical support staff. "Would you mind walking me through how the algorithm actually works?" Daniel asked. "I understand the conceptual framework, but I'm curious about the practical implementation." Sarah led him to the primary workstation where she'd prepared a demonstration. Using sanitized data that wouldn't reveal proprietary methodologies, she pulled up the real-time market analysis dashboard, showing how InvestSmart processed news feeds, social media sentiment, economic indicators, and historical patterns to generate investment recommendations. The system analyzes approximately 50,000 data points per minute, she explained, highlighting different components of the interface. Traditional algorithms focus primarily on price movements and trading volume, but InvestSmart incorporates contextual information that humans use intuitively, but computers typically ignore. Daniel studied the display with obvious interest, asking specific questions about machine learning techniques, data verification protocols, and scalability considerations. His questions demonstrated understanding of both the technical complexity and the business implications of InvestSmart's approach. "How do you handle the latency issues involved in processing so much real-time information?" he asked. "We use distributed computing architecture with predictive caching," Kevin interjected. "The system anticipates which data combinations are most likely to be relevant and pre-processes calculations for faster response times." "Impressive. What about accuracy degradation as market conditions change?" Amanda looked up from her code editor. "The algorithm includes adaptive learning protocols. It continuously refines its analytical models based on performance feedback and changing market dynamics." Sarah watched Daniel interact with her team, noting that his questions revealed sophisticated understanding of both technology and finance. Unlike most potential investors, he seemed genuinely interested in how InvestSmart worked rather than simply what returns it could generate. "Can you show me some actual performance data?" he asked. Sarah pulled up a series of charts comparing InvestSmart's predictions to actual market outcomes over the past 6 months. The results were impressive. Consistently accurate forecasts across multiple asset classes, with particularly strong performance during periods of market volatility, when traditional analysis often failed. "These numbers are remarkable," Daniel said, studying the comparative data. "Have you shared this performance history with other potential investors?" "Everyone I've pitched has seen similar data. The problem isn't proving that the algorithm works, it's convincing people to invest in something they don't fully understand, or convincing them to support innovation instead of trying to change it into something more conventional." Sarah felt a surge of recognition. Daniel had identified exactly the challenge she'd been facing with every potential investor. They wanted the returns that InvestSmart could generate, but they also wanted to modify the system to match their preconceptions about how financial technology should work. Exactly. Most investors see the performance numbers and immediately start suggesting improvements that would fundamentally alter what makes the system effective. Daniel spent another hour examining different aspects of InvestSmart's operation, from the technical infrastructure to the user interface design. He asked Amanda to demonstrate the compliance reporting features and had Kevin explain the data security protocols that protected user information and trading strategies. "What's your biggest operational concern right now?" he asked as they concluded the technical demonstration. Sarah considered the question carefully. "Scaling the user base without compromising algorithm performance. Each new user provides additional data that improves the system's analytical capabilities, But too much growth too quickly could overwhelm our processing infrastructure. What would optimal growth look like? Steady expansion with institutional clients who understand the technology and can provide meaningful feedback. Building reputation through consistent performance rather than aggressive marketing. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. That's a sustainable approach, but it requires patient capital from investors who understand long-term value creation. They moved to Sarah's desk area, where she'd prepared financial projections and business development plans. Daniel reviewed the documents with the kind of attention to detail that suggested genuine interest rather than polite professional courtesy. Your revenue projections seem conservative given the performance data you've shown me, he observed. I'd rather exceed conservative projections than fall short of aggressive ones. Besides, InvestSmart's value lies in consistent performance over time, not dramatic short-term gains. Smart approach. What would you need to accelerate growth while maintaining quality? Sarah pulled out the detailed expansion plan she'd developed but hadn't shared with Meridian Financial. Additional processing infrastructure, expanded data sources, and most importantly, the credibility that comes from institutional backing. Define institutional backing. Partnership with a respected investment firm that can provide not just capital but access to sophisticated clients who appreciate advanced analytical tools. Daniel studied the expansion plan, occasionally making notes in his portfolio. Sarah found herself watching his reactions, trying to determine whether he saw InvestSmart as an investment opportunity or something more significant. Sarah, can I ask you a personal question? The shift to her first name and the more intimate tone caught her attention. Of course. What's your long-term vision for InvestSmart? Not the business projections, but what you want to accomplish. It was the kind of question that revealed whether someone understood entrepreneurship as a personal mission or simply profit maximization. Sarah realized that her answer would influence how Daniel viewed both her and her company. I want to democratize sophisticated financial analysis. Right now, advanced predictive algorithms are only available to major institutional investors with massive resources. InvestSmart could make that same analytical power accessible to smaller investment firms, independent advisors, and eventually individual investors. That's ambitious. Also potentially disruptive to established financial institutions. Innovation is always disruptive. The question is whether you're creating positive disruption that benefits users or just change for its own sake. Daniel closed his portfolio and leaned back in his chair. I've seen what I needed to see. InvestSmart is everything I hoped it would be. When I first heard about your work, Sarah felt her heart rate increase. What happens next? I'd like to make you a formal partnership proposal. But I want to be transparent about something first. The qualifier made Sarah suddenly cautious. What kind of transparency? Crawford & Associates isn't just interested in InvestSmart as an investment opportunity. We're looking for the foundation of a larger financial technology initiative. Sarah felt confusion mixed with concern. What kind of initiative? Building a comprehensive platform that combines advanced analytics, automated trading, and personalized investment management. InvestSmart would be the core technology, but we'd expand the offering to include complementary services. It sounded promising, but also potentially overwhelming. Sarah had focused on perfecting one sophisticated algorithm. Daniel was describing a much more ambitious undertaking. That's significantly larger in scope than anything I've considered. Which is why partnership makes sense. You continue developing and refining the analytical technology while I handle business development, regulatory compliance, and market expansion. Sarah studied his face, trying to determine whether this represented opportunity or the same kind of corporate takeover she'd been trying to avoid. What would my role be in this expanded initiative? Chief Technology Officer with full authority over algorithm development and technical architecture, plus significant equity stake and board representation. It was more autonomy than Meridian had offered, but also more complexity than she'd anticipated. Sarah realized she needed time to evaluate what Daniel was proposing before making any commitments. "This is considerably more elaborate than I expected when you called yesterday. I believe in thinking big when the foundation is solid. InvestSmart is that foundation." Kevin and Amanda had been working quietly during the business discussion, but Sarah could tell they were listening with interest. Both developers had strong opinions about corporate culture and would be valuable sources of feedback about any partnership proposal. "I need to consider everything we've discussed," Sarah said. "This is a significant decision that affects not just me but my entire team. Of course, take whatever time you need. But Sarah, I want you to understand something important." She waited for him to continue. "What you've built here isn't just a successful algorithm. It's a revolutionary approach to financial analysis that could transform how investment decisions are made. That kind of innovation deserves support, not absorption into some larger corporate structure." Sarah felt a mixture of validation and uncertainty. Daniel seemed to understand and appreciate what she'd accomplished, but she still wasn't entirely sure about his motivations or the scope of what he was proposing. "When would you need an answer?" "Soon enough to present an alternative to Meridian's deadline, but not so soon that you can't make an informed decision." As Daniel prepared to leave, he handed Sarah a detailed partnership proposal that he'd apparently prepared in advance. The document was professionally formatted and comprehensive, suggesting considerable thought and preparation. "Everything we've discussed is outlined in there, plus financial projections and implementation timelines. Review it with your team, consult with attorneys if you want, and let me know what questions you have." After he left, Sarah found herself holding a proposal that could represent either the opportunity she'd been seeking or a more sophisticated version of the same challenges she'd been trying to avoid. The difference was that Daniel Crawford seemed to understand what made InvestSmart valuable, while Meridian Financial had simply seen it as an asset to be acquired and optimized. Kevin looked up from his workstation. "So what do you think?" "I think," Sarah said, "that tomorrow is going to be very interesting." She spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing Daniel's proposal with Kevin and Amanda, discussing the technical implications of the expanded platform he'd described. Both developers were intrigued by the possibilities, but shared Sarah's caution about partnerships that seemed almost too good to be true. "The technology integration he's describing is ambitious but feasible," Amanda observed. "The question is whether Crawford and Associates has the resources and expertise to actually implement something this comprehensive, and whether they really understand what makes InvestSmart work," Kevin added. "Scaling the algorithm is one thing, but maintaining its effectiveness while adding new functionality is considerably more complex." Sarah realized that her decision about Daniel's proposal would determine not just InvestSmart's future, but the kind of company she wanted to build and the kind of entrepreneur she wanted to become. The choice was between safe conventional growth and ambitious innovative expansion, between maintaining complete control and sharing responsibility for greater potential impact. That evening, she called her parents in San Francisco, something she did whenever she faced major life decisions. Her father, a professor of economics at UC Berkeley, and her mother, a software engineer who'd built her career during the early days of Silicon Valley, provided the kind of practical wisdom that came from understanding both business and technology. Provided the kind of practical wisdom that came from understanding both business and technology. "Question isn't whether this Crawford person is legitimate," her mother said after Sarah had explained the situation. "The question is whether his vision aligns with yours and whether you can maintain control over the aspects of the business that matter most to you." "What matters most?" her father asked. Sarah considered the question while staring out her apartment window at the Chicago skyline. "Keeping InvestSmart innovative and effective. Making sure it serves users rather than just generating profits." and maintaining the independence to make decisions based on what's best for the technology rather than what's safest for investors. Then evaluate his proposal based on those criteria, her mother advised. If partnering with Crawford and Associates supports your priorities, it's worth considering. If it compromises them, find another option. As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that her parents had helped her identify the right framework for making this decision. The choice wasn't between Daniel's proposal and Meridian's offer. It was between different approaches to building the kind of company she wanted InvestSmart to become. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of determining which path offered the best chance of achieving her vision while avoiding the pitfalls that had destroyed other innovative startups. The answer would determine whether InvestSmart remained an independent technology company or became part of something larger and potentially more impactful. But tonight, she allowed herself to imagine what success might look like with the right partner, someone who understood that innovation required support rather than control, and that the best business relationships were built on shared vision rather than purely financial considerations. The possibility was both exciting and terrifying. Which Sarah had learned was usually a sign that she was considering something worth pursuing. The Crawford and Associates proposal sat on Sarah's kitchen table like an unopened letter that might contain either a lottery ticket or a subpoena. She'd read through it twice the previous evening, making notes in the margins and highlighting sections that required further clarification. The document was impressive in its thoroughness: financial projections, implementation timelines, organizational structures, and legal frameworks that suggested Daniel had invested considerable time in understanding not just InvestSmart's potential, but the entire fintech landscape. Jessica emerged from her bedroom wearing running gear, already checking her fitness tracker and preparing for her morning workout routine. "You're up early for someone who is still reading contracts at midnight. I couldn't sleep. Every time I think I understand what Daniel is proposing, I find another layer of complexity that changes everything." Good complexity or concerning complexity? Sarah poured coffee into her travel mug while considering the question. Both. The financial terms are better than anything I could have hoped for. The growth projections are ambitious but realistic. The technical integration he's describing would create something genuinely revolutionary in the investment management space. But it's also exactly what someone would propose if they wanted to gain control of InvestSmart while making it look like partnership rather than acquisition. Jessica paused her stretching routine to look directly at Sarah. "You know what you need to do? Due diligence. Real research into Crawford and Associates, their previous investments, and whether their success stories match their marketing materials. I spent 2 hours last night trying to find detailed information about their portfolio companies. Everything looks legitimate, but it's all pretty surface-level stuff. Then dig deeper. Call their previous partners. Visit their office. Treat this like the major business decision it is instead of hoping your instincts are enough." An hour later, Sarah was at her desk making a list of research priorities, while Kevin and Amanda worked on routine system maintenance and user interface refinements. The first item on her list was verifying Crawford and Associates' track record with companies. Similar to InvestSmart. She started by researching quantum analytics, a machine learning startup that Daniel's proposal had mentioned as a successful partnership example. The company's website showed impressive growth metrics and client testimonials, but Sarah wanted to understand the actual partnership dynamics rather than just the marketing presentation. After some investigative work through LinkedIn and industry databases, she found contact information for Dr. Rachel Thompson, quantum analytics founder and current CTO. Sarah crafted a careful email explaining that she was considering a partnership with Crawford and Associates and would appreciate any insights about their collaboration experience. Dr. Thompson called back within 2 hours. "Sarah Chun, I remember your presentation at the FinTech Innovation Conference. Impressive work on predictive algorithms. Thank you. I'm hoping you might be willing to share some thoughts about working with Daniel Crawford. Absolutely. Daniel contacted me about 18 months ago when quantum analytics was in a situation similar to what I imagine you're facing: successful technology, limited resources for scaling, and pressure from traditional investors who wanted to change our core approach. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. What was Crawford and Associates' approach? Partnership rather than acquisition. Daniel provided capital and business development expertise, while letting me maintain control over technical architecture and product development. It's been exactly what he promised. No interference with your technology decisions? None. In fact, he's been protective of our technical independence when clients have requested modifications that would compromise system effectiveness. Sarah made detailed notes while Dr. Thompson explained how the partnership had enabled quantum analytics to expand from a boutique consulting firm to a major player in the machine learning space. The growth trajectory was impressive, but more importantly, the founder had maintained creative control over her work. One thing I should mention, Dr. Thompson added. Daniel has a tendency to think bigger than most entrepreneurs initially comfortable with. His expansion plans for quantum analytics seemed overwhelming at first, but the results have exceeded even his projections. After ending the call, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic about Daniel's legitimacy, but still uncertain about the scope of what he was proposing for InvestSmart. She spent the rest of the morning researching Crawford and Associates' other portfolio companies, finding similar patterns of successful growth, and maintained founder autonomy. At noon, she called Daniel's office to request a meeting at Crawford and Associates headquarters. If she was going to consider a partnership that would fundamentally change InvestSmart's trajectory, she wanted to understand the organization she'd be working with. Of course, Daniel said when she reached him. Would this afternoon work? I'd like you to meet some of the team members you'd be collaborating with. Crawford and Associates occupied 3 floors of a renovated Art Deco building in Chicago's financial district, with interiors that balanced modern technology infrastructure with preserved architectural details. Sarah was impressed by the sophisticated but unpretentious atmosphere. Expensive without being ostentatious, professional without being sterile. Daniel met her in the lobby, dressed more casually than during their previous meetings, but still projecting the kind of confident competence that had impressed her during their dinner conversation. He led her through offices where she could see developers working on code, analysts reviewing market data, and business development specialists conducting client calls. We handle technology development, strategic planning, and client relations for all our portfolio companies, he explained as they walked. The goal is to provide comprehensive support while letting founders focus on what they do best. Sarah met the team members who would potentially work with InvestSmart: Maria Santos, a former SEC regulatory specialist who handled compliance issues; David Kim, a systems architect who specialized in financial data integration; and Jennifer Walsh, a business development director with connections throughout the institutional investment community. Sarah's algorithm represents exactly the kind of innovation we're designed to support, Daniel told the group. Sophisticated technology that requires careful nurturing rather than heavy-handed management. The team members asked intelligent questions about InvestSmart's technical architecture and market positioning, demonstrating genuine understanding of both the opportunities and challenges involved in scaling financial technology platforms. Sarah found herself impressed by their expertise and encouraged by their apparent enthusiasm for her work. What's your biggest concern about partnership arrangements? Maria Santos asked during their discussion. Sarah appreciated the direct question. Losing control over technical decisions that affect algorithm performance. I've seen too many promising technologies damaged by well-intentioned but misguided optimization efforts. That's exactly why we structure partnerships to preserve founder authority over core technology, David Kim replied. Our job is to handle everything else so you can focus on what makes your system effective. After meeting with the team, Daniel led Sarah to his office, which occupied a corner of the building's top floor with views of both the Chicago River and Lake Michigan. The space was decorated with a mix of modern business furnishings and what appeared to be personal items, books on economics and technology, photographs from various travel destinations, and a collection of awards recognizing innovative business practices. What do you think? He asked, settling into one of two chairs positioned near the window. I'm impressed by your team's expertise and their understanding of the challenges involved in scaling technology platforms, but you still have reservations. Sarah studied his face, trying to read the motivations behind his carefully crafted partnership proposal. I keep wondering why you're willing to offer so much autonomy when most investors want significant control over their investments. Daniel was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider how much to reveal about his business philosophy. I've learned that trying to control innovation usually destroys it. The most successful partnerships happen when everyone focuses on what they do best and trusts their partners to handle the rest. That sounds ideal, but it also seems too good to be true. What would convince you that it's genuine? Sarah had been thinking about this question since their first dinner conversation. References from other founders who've maintained technical control after partnering with you. Financial transparency about Crawford and Associates structure and backing. And clear legal frameworks that protect InvestSmart's intellectual property. All reasonable requests. I can provide detailed references, complete financial disclosure, and whatever legal protections you and your attorneys consider necessary. Daniel pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah additional information about Crawford and Associates funding sources, investment performance, and organizational structure. The firm appeared to be well capitalized by a combination of institutional investors and successful entrepreneurs who understood the value of supporting innovation rather than controlling it. There's something else I want to show you, he said, navigating to a different section of his presentation. This is what the integrated platform could look like with InvestSmart as the core analytical engine. The mock-ups and technical specifications he displayed were far more sophisticated than Sarah had expected. The proposed platform would combine her predictive algorithms with automated trading capabilities, personalized portfolio management, and comprehensive reporting tools that could serve everyone from individual investors to major institutions. This is incredibly ambitious, she said, studying the technical architecture diagrams, but achievable with the right team and adequate resources. Your algorithm provides the foundation, but the real value comes from creating a comprehensive ecosystem that makes sophisticated financial analysis accessible to a much broader market. Sarah realized that Daniel's vision extended far beyond simply scaling InvestSmart's current capabilities. He was proposing to build an entirely new category of financial technology platform, one that could democratize access to advanced investment tools in ways that traditional firms couldn't or wouldn't attempt. What's the timeline for developing something this comprehensive? 18 months for the core platform, another year for full market rollout. But we'd launch incrementally, starting with enhanced versions of InvestSmart's current capabilities and gradually adding new features. The scope was exciting, but also overwhelming. Sarah had spent 2 years perfecting a single sophisticated algorithm. Daniel was describing a multi-year project that would require coordinating numerous technical and business development initiatives. I need to understand something, she said. Why is Crawford and Associates willing to invest so heavily in this platform concept? What's your expected return on such a significant commitment? Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more serious. Because I believe this kind of platform represents the future of investment management. Traditional firms are too invested in existing approaches to innovate meaningfully. Independent developers like you have the technology, but lack the resources for large-scale implementation. Partnership creates opportunities that neither side could achieve alone. And the financial returns? Potentially enormous if we execute properly. The investment management industry generates hundreds of billions in annual revenue, most of it based on outdated analytical methods. A platform that demonstrates superior performance could capture significant market share relatively quickly. Sarah appreciated his honesty about profit expectations, while noting that he seemed genuinely committed to innovation rather than simply revenue maximization. The combination suggested someone who understood that long-term success required building something genuinely valuable rather than just exploiting market inefficiencies. "I want to propose something," she said after reviewing more of the technical specifications. "A pilot project. Rather than committing to full platform development immediately, what if we start with a limited collaboration to test how well our approaches align?" Daniel's interest was immediately apparent. "What kind of pilot project?" "Expand InvestSmart's capabilities incrementally while maintaining its current structure. Add some of the features you've described, better reporting tools, enhanced user interface, integration with additional data sources. If the collaboration works well, we can consider larger initiatives. That's a sensible approach." "What timeline were you thinking?" 6 months. Long enough to evaluate partnership dynamics and technical integration challenges, short enough to limit risk if things don't work out. Daniel made notes on his tablet while considering the proposal. "I like the incremental approach. It gives both sides opportunities to learn how to work together effectively before committing to larger projects." They spent another hour discussing implementation details for the pilot project, covering everything from technical architecture to legal frameworks. Sarah found herself increasingly comfortable with Daniel's approach and impressed by his willingness to structure the arrangement around her concerns rather than simply presenting take-it-or-leave-it terms. "There's one more thing I want to address," she said as their meeting was concluding. "Personal boundaries. I appreciate your interest in InvestSmart and your professional approach to partnership discussions. But I want to be clear that I'm looking for business collaboration, not romantic involvement." Daniel's reaction was immediate and somewhat amused. "Sarah, I appreciate the directness. I want to be equally clear that my interest in InvestSmart is purely professional. You've built something remarkable, and I'd like to help you scale it successfully. Any personal attraction I might feel is completely separate from business considerations." Sarah felt her cheeks warming slightly. "Personal attraction? You're brilliant, ambitious, and passionate about your work. Those are attractive qualities. But mixing business and personal relationships is complicated under the best circumstances, and potentially catastrophic when significant investments are involved." She appreciated his honesty while noting that he'd managed to compliment her and establish boundaries simultaneously. "So we're both committed to keeping this strictly professional?" "Absolutely. Though I should mention that maintaining professional boundaries doesn't mean we can't enjoy working together or develop mutual respect and friendship over time." Sarah realized that Daniel had addressed her concerns while leaving room for the kind of collegial relationship that made business partnerships successful. His approach suggested someone who understood the difference between personal and professional attraction and could manage both appropriately. "I think we have the foundation for a successful pilot project," she said, standing to leave. "I think so too. I'll have legal documentation prepared for the 6-month collaboration, incorporating all the protections and autonomy provisions we've discussed." As Sarah left Crawford and Associates' offices, she felt cautiously optimistic about the potential partnership while remaining aware that the real test would come during actual collaboration. Daniel had impressed her with his team's expertise, his commitment to preserving her technical autonomy, and his willingness to structure their arrangement around her concerns, but she also recognized that 6 months of working closely together would reveal aspects of both their personalities and business philosophies that couldn't be evaluated during formal meetings and presentations. The pilot project would determine whether their professional compatibility matched their apparent shared vision for InvestSmart's future. That evening, she called Kevin and Amanda to brief them on the proposed pilot project, explaining how it would affect their roles and InvestSmart's development priorities. Both developers were enthusiastic about the additional resources and technical challenges that collaboration with Crawford and Associates would provide. "It sounds like the best of both worlds," Amanda observed. "Additional support without losing control over our core technology. And if it doesn't work out, we're only committed for 6 months," Kevin added. "Low risk, high potential upside." Sarah realized that her team's positive reaction helped confirm her own instincts about the pilot project. If Kevin and Amanda were comfortable with the arrangement, it probably represented genuine opportunity rather than sophisticated manipulation. Later that night, she reviewed Daniel's partnership proposal one final time, making notes about modifications needed for the pilot project structure. The document represented either the beginning of InvestSmart's transformation into something much larger and more impactful, or a carefully managed experiment that would help her understand what she really wanted for her company's future. Either way, she was about to find out whether Daniel Crawford was the business partner she'd been searching for, or simply the most sophisticated version yet of the same challenges she'd been trying to avoid. The difference would become clear over the next 6 months, as they worked together to determine whether professional partnership could coexist with the kind of personal attraction that neither of them had explicitly acknowledged but both clearly felt. Sarah closed the proposal document and prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow she would begin a collaboration that could either fulfill her entrepreneurial ambitions or teach her valuable lessons about the complexities of mixing business success with personal feelings. In either case, the next phase of InvestSmart's development was about to become considerably more interesting. 3 weeks into the pilot project, Sarah discovered that working closely with Daniel Crawford was more complicated than she'd anticipated, though not for the reasons she'd expected. The professional collaboration was exceeding her most optimistic projections. InvestSmart's enhanced capabilities were generating performance metrics that impressed even her usually cautious development team. The problem was that Daniel's competence, creativity, and genuine enthusiasm for her work were making it increasingly difficult to maintain the strictly professional boundaries they'd both agreed to establish. The morning crisis that would test both their business partnership and personal resolve began with an urgent call from Amanda at 6:30 a.m. Sarah answered her phone while still in bed, immediately alert when she heard the stress in her colleague's voice. "Sarah, we've got a serious problem. The overnight processing run crashed, and I'm seeing data inconsistencies that could affect today's market analysis." Sarah was dressed and heading toward her car within 10 minutes, her mind racing through potential causes and solutions for system failures that could undermine InvestSmart's reliability during the crucial pilot project period. A data processing crash at this stage could destroy the credibility she'd spent months building with institutional clients, who were finally beginning to trust her algorithm's recommendations. She arrived at the office to find Kevin and Amanda hunched over multiple monitors displaying error logs, system diagnostics, and data flowcharts that painted a picture of cascading technical failures. The enhanced processing capabilities that Crawford and Associates had helped implement were working exactly as designed, but the increased data volume had revealed weaknesses in InvestSmart's underlying infrastructure that hadn't been apparent during smaller-scale operations. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked, pulling up a chair beside Kevin's workstation. "Bad enough that we can't generate reliable predictions for today's trading session," Kevin replied without looking up from his code editor. "The European market data integration is throwing off our baseline calculations, and the sentiment analysis module is producing conflicting results." Amanda pointed to a series of charts showing data discrepancies between different processing Modules. It's like the system is trying to analyze information that doesn't quite fit together properly. Everything worked perfectly during testing, but real-world conditions are exposing integration problems we didn't anticipate. Sarah felt her stomach sink as she realized the implications. InvestSmart had attracted 3 new institutional clients during the pilot project, all of whom relied on her algorithm's daily recommendations for significant investment decisions. If she couldn't provide reliable analysis today, those clients would lose confidence in the system and potentially abandon their subscriptions. What's our timeline for fixing this? If we work straight through, maybe 12 hours to identify all the integration issues and implement patches, Kevin estimated. But that's assuming we don't discover additional problems during the debugging process. Market opens in 3 hours. Amanda added unnecessarily. Sarah grabbed her phone and called Daniel, who answered immediately despite the early hour. Daniel, we have an emergency. The system integration we implemented last week is causing processing failures that could compromise today's market analysis. I'm on my way, he said without hesitation. What do you need? Additional technical resources, backup processing capabilities, and probably some way to explain to our clients why their investment recommendations might be delayed. Give me 20 minutes. True to his word, Daniel arrived within 20 minutes, accompanied by David Kim and 2 other technical specialists from Crawford & Associates. Sarah briefed them on the situation while Kevin and Amanda continued working on diagnostic analysis and emergency repairs. This is exactly the kind of scaling challenge we anticipated, David said after reviewing the error logs. The good news is that the core algorithm is working perfectly. The problems are all in the data integration layers, which means we can implement fixes without affecting InvestSmart's fundamental analytical capabilities. Daniel was already on his phone, coordinating with what sounded like external technical support resources. I'm arranging for backup processing infrastructure that can handle the workload while we fix the integration issues. It'll be expensive, but it'll keep your client's analysis running on schedule. Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and concern. How expensive? Don't worry about that right now. Focus on fixing the technical problems. We'll handle the financial implications later. For the next 6 hours, Sarah's office became a crisis management center with developers from both companies working side by side to diagnose problems, implement solutions, and test fixes under intense time pressure. Sarah found herself coordinating between multiple teams while simultaneously diving into complex technical details that required her specific knowledge of InvestSmart's algorithmic architecture. Daniel proved to be an unexpectedly effective technical project manager, facilitating communication between different specialists while ensuring that everyone stayed focused on the most critical issues. Sarah noticed that he seemed to understand both the business implications and the technical complexities well enough to make intelligent decisions about priority allocation and resource deployment. The European data feeds are stable now, Amanda announced around noon. Sentiment analysis is producing consistent results, and the baseline calculations are back within normal parameters. Backup processing is handling the increased workload without performance degradation, David added. Client recommendations will be delivered on schedule. Sarah felt exhaustion and relief in equal measure as she realized they'd managed to resolve the crisis without compromising InvestSmart's commitments to its institutional clients. The enhanced system was now more robust than it had been before the failure, with improved error handling and redundant processing capabilities that would prevent similar problems in the future. We need to debrief this incident and document everything we learned, she said to the assembled team. But first, I want to thank everyone for exceptional work under difficult circumstances. As the Crawford & Associates technical team packed up their equipment and prepared to return to their offices, Daniel remained behind to discuss the incident's implications with Sarah, Kevin, and Amanda, What's our assessment of the overall situation?" he asked. Kevin leaned back in his chair, looking tired but satisfied. "The system integration is more complex than we initially realized, but the problems were all solvable. With the improvements we implemented today, InvestSmart should be more stable and scalable than ever." "What about client impact?" Sarah asked. "Minimal," Amanda replied. "We delivered all scheduled recommendations within normal timeframes. Most clients probably didn't even realize there were any technical issues." Daniel made notes on his tablet while listening to the technical assessment. This kind of scaling challenge is exactly why pilot projects exist. Better to discover and resolve these issues now than during full platform deployment. Sarah appreciated his perspective, but she was also aware that the crisis had revealed how dependent InvestSmart had become on Crawford and Associates' resources and expertise. The backup processing infrastructure that had saved the day was expensive and sophisticated, representing capabilities that her independent startup couldn't have accessed without partnership support. "I'm concerned about resource dependency," she said. "If similar problems arise in the future, InvestSmart needs to be able to handle them independently. Which is why we're going to invest in permanent infrastructure upgrades," Daniel replied. "Today's emergency measures become tomorrow's standard capabilities." After Kevin and Amanda left for the evening, Sarah and Daniel remained in the office to complete incident documentation and discuss lessons learned from the day's crisis. The shared stress of managing technical emergencies had created a different kind of working relationship, one based on mutual competence and trust rather than formal professional courtesy. "You were impressive today," Daniel said as they reviewed system performance reports. Managing technical teams under pressure while simultaneously handling client communications and strategic decision-making. Sarah felt herself responding to the compliment more warmly than she'd intended. "You weren't exactly passive yourself. I didn't know you had hands-on technical project management experience. I learned early in my career that you can't effectively support technology companies without understanding the technical challenges they face." They worked side by side for another hour, occasionally discussing technical details, but also sharing more personal observations about entrepreneurship, risk management, and the challenges of building innovative companies. Sarah found herself noticing things about Daniel that had nothing to do with business: the way he listened with complete attention, his tendency to solve problems systematically rather than reactively, and his apparent genuine concern for InvestSmart's success beyond its financial potential. "Sarah," he said as they prepared to leave the office, "can I ask you something personal?" She felt her pulse quicken slightly. "Of course. Are you happy with how the pilot project is developing? Not just the technical aspects, but the working relationship?" It was a loaded question that could be interpreted several different ways. Sarah chose to answer honestly rather than diplomatically. "The professional collaboration has exceeded my expectations. You've provided exactly the kind of support I hoped for while respecting the boundaries we established. But I'm finding it more difficult than expected to maintain purely professional feelings about someone I work with so closely and respect so much." Daniel was quiet for a moment, and Sarah wondered if she'd revealed more than was wise. They'd both committed to keeping business and personal relationships separate, but the reality of working together had proven more complex than either had anticipated. "I'm glad you said that," he finally replied, "because I've been struggling with the same issue. You're brilliant, dedicated, and passionate about your work in ways that I find increasingly attractive. But I don't want those feelings to compromise our business relationship." Sarah felt relief mixed with apprehension. Acknowledging mutual attraction was either the first step toward complicating their partnership or the beginning of honest communication that would help them navigate the situation more effectively. "What do we do about it?" "I think we continue being honest with each other about what we're feeling while maintaining our commitment to professional priorities. The pilot project is too important to both of us to risk damaging it with personal complications. And after the pilot project? Daniel smiled, and Sarah realized it was the first time she'd seen him look uncertain. I guess we'll evaluate the situation then, and decide what makes sense for both the business relationship and whatever personal feelings have developed. Walking to their cars in the parking garage, Sarah reflected on how much had changed during a single day of crisis management. InvestSmart was now more technically robust and better supported than ever before. Her working relationship with Daniel had evolved from formal partnership to genuine collaboration based on mutual respect and shared problem-solving. And they both acknowledged personal feelings that could either enhance their professional relationship or complicate it beyond repair. The next morning brought confirmation that the previous day's crisis had actually strengthened InvestSmart's position with institutional clients. 3 separate investment firms called to express satisfaction with the consistency of analytical recommendations and to inquire about expanding their subscriptions to include additional services. Word is getting around that your algorithm maintained performance during yesterday's market volatility, said Margaret Foster from Whitman Capital Management. That kind of reliability is exactly what institutional clients are looking for. Sarah realized that what had felt like a potential disaster had actually become InvestSmart's most compelling marketing demonstration. The system's ability to provide consistent analysis during technical difficulties proved its robustness in ways that controlled testing never could. Daniel arrived at her office mid-morning with coffee and pastries from the bakery downstairs, a gesture that fell somewhere between professional courtesy and personal thoughtfulness. How are you feeling about yesterday? He asked, settling into the chair beside her desk that had become his usual spot during their daily coordination meetings. Exhausted but optimistic. The client response has been overwhelmingly positive, and the technical improvements we implemented should prevent similar problems in the future. What about the personal conversation we had? Sarah appreciated his directness even as she felt nervous about revisiting the topic. I think we handled it well, acknowledging the traction while committing to professional priorities. I agree. But I also think we should establish some guidelines for managing the situation going forward. They spent the next half hour developing what they jokingly called their professional attraction management protocol, regular check-ins about how personal feelings might be affecting business decisions, clear boundaries around after-hours socializing, and commitment to transparent communication about any concerns that arose. This feels simultaneously very mature and completely ridiculous, Sarah observed. Most good business practices do, Daniel replied. The question is whether it helps us work together more effectively. Over the following weeks, their systematic approach to managing personal attraction while maintaining professional collaboration proved surprisingly effective. Sarah found that explicitly acknowledging her growing feelings for Daniel actually made it easier to focus on business priorities during their daily meetings and collaborative work sessions. The pilot project continued to exceed performance expectations, with InvestSmart's enhanced capabilities attracting attention from institutional investors who had previously dismissed algorithmic trading as unreliable. Sarah realized that her partnership with Crawford and Associates was providing exactly the credibility and resources she'd needed to scale her technology without compromising its innovative features. But she also recognized that 6 months of working closely with Daniel Crawford was changing her perspective on both business partnership and personal relationships. The combination of professional respect, intellectual compatibility, and acknowledged mutual attraction was creating exactly the kind of complicated situation she'd tried to avoid when establishing their original boundaries. As the pilot project approached its halfway point, Sarah began to realize that her choice wasn't simply between independence and partnership, but between different approaches to building both a successful company and a meaningful personal life. The question was whether she could find a way to pursue both goals simultaneously without compromising either, or whether success in one area would require sacrificing opportunities in the other. The answer would depend on whether Daniel Crawford was truly the business partner she'd been searching for, or whether he represented something more complex and potentially more valuable than purely professional collaboration. Either way, the next 3 months would determine not just InvestSmart's future, but the direction of her own personal and professional development in ways she was only beginning to understand. The Chicago Investment Forum represented everything Sarah had initially hoped to avoid about traditional finance. 300 men in identical suits, discussing market strategies that hadn't changed significantly since the 1980s, but as she stood at the registration table adjusting her conference badge, she realized that InvestSmart's growing reputation had earned her an invitation to present at one of the industry's most prestigious events. The opportunity to demonstrate her algorithm's capabilities to a room full of institutional decision-makers was too valuable to pass up. Regardless of her personal discomfort with the venue's old boys club atmosphere, Daniel appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of confident expression that suggested he was completely at home in this environment. He'd grown up in Chicago's financial district, attending these same conferences with his father before eventually building his own investment firm. For him, navigating rooms full of traditional investors was as natural as breathing. "How are you feeling about the presentation?" he asked, handing her the larger coffee cup. Terrified and excited in equal measure. This is exactly the audience that InvestSmart needs to reach, but they're also the group most likely to dismiss algorithmic trading as unreliable technology. They'll dismiss it right up until you show them the performance numbers. Then they'll want to know how quickly they can access your recommendations. Sarah appreciated his confidence, though she suspected he was underestimating the challenge of convincing traditional investors to trust something they didn't fully understand. Over the past month, she'd refined her presentation to focus on results rather than technical methodology, hoping to win skeptics over with data before explaining how the Kigrodi system actually worked. The morning sessions confirmed her expectations about the conference's conservative approach to investment strategy. Speaker after speaker discussed market fundamentals, risk management, and portfolio diversification using frameworks that had been considered cutting-edge 20 years earlier. Sarah noticed that very few presentations mentioned artificial intelligence, machine learning, or any of the technological innovations that were transforming other industries. During the lunch break, she found herself at a table with several portfolio managers from major institutional investors, all of whom seemed genuinely curious about her background and InvestSmart's approach to market analysis. "I have to admit, I'm skeptical about algorithmic trading," said Robert Chun from Millennium Asset Management. "We've tested several systems over the years, and they all seem to work brilliantly until market conditions change unexpectedly. That's exactly the problem InvestSmart was designed to solve," Sarah replied. "Traditional algorithms are essentially sophisticated versions of technical analysis. They identify patterns in historical data and assume those patterns will continue. Our system incorporates adaptive learning that adjusts to changing market conditions in real time." "How do you prevent the system from being fooled by temporary anomalies or false signals?" asked Linda Martinez from Global Pension Fund. Sarah found herself explaining InvestSmart's multi-layered verification protocols and the behavioral psychology components that distinguished genuine market trends from artificial fluctuations. The portfolio managers asked increasingly sophisticated questions, suggesting genuine interest rather than polite professional courtesy. "What kind of performance consistency have you demonstrated?" Robert Chun asked. 18 months of live trading. Data showing average annual returns of 23% with maximum drawdowns of less than 8%, Sarah replied. The system has maintained those metrics through 3 separate periods of significant market volatility. The conversation was interrupted by the conference organizer announcing that afternoon sessions were beginning, but several of the portfolio managers asked for her business card and mentioned interest in scheduling follow-up meetings. Sarah realized that her informal lunch presentation might be generating more valuable connections than her scheduled formal session. Daniel had been listening to the conversation from a nearby table, occasionally contributing observations about market conditions or regulatory considerations. Sarah appreciated that he supported her presentation without trying to dominate the discussion or position himself as InvestSmart's spokesperson. "That went well," he said as they walked toward the main conference hall where Sarah would be presenting to the full audience. "Better than expected. I think some of them are genuinely interested in learning more about algorithmic approaches. They should be. Traditional portfolio management is becoming increasingly inefficient as markets become more complex and information flows faster." Sarah's presentation was scheduled for 2 o'clock, immediately after lunch when conference audiences were typically least attentive. She'd prepared for this challenge by structuring her talk as an interactive demonstration rather than a traditional lecture, planning to engage the audience with real-time market analysis rather than abstract theoretical discussions. The conference hall contained nearly 300 attendees, representing billions of dollars in institutional investment assets. Sarah felt her nervousness spike as she approached the podium, but she reminded herself that she'd successfully defended her work to skeptical audiences many times before. "Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Chun, founder of InvestSmart Analytics. I'm here to discuss why artificial intelligence represents the future of investment management, and why most of you are probably going to resist that future until your competitors force you to embrace it." The opening got their attention. Sarah noticed several audience members sitting up straighter and putting away their phones to focus on her presentation. "How many of you have heard the phrase 'this time is different' and immediately dismissed whatever followed as naive optimism?" She paused as hands went up throughout the audience. "You're right to be skeptical. Market fundamentals don't change dramatically over short periods, but the tools available for analyzing those fundamentals have evolved exponentially. And most investment firms are still using analytical methods that were developed before personal computers existed." Sarah spent the next 20 minutes demonstrating InvestSmart's real-time analysis capabilities, using current market conditions to show how her algorithm processed information that traditional analysis would either miss entirely or interpret incorrectly. She highlighted specific examples where InvestSmart had correctly predicted market movements that had surprised human analysts. "The question isn't whether artificial intelligence can outperform human analysis," she said as her presentation reached its conclusion. "The question is how long you can afford to compete against firms that are using superior analytical tools." The audience response was more engaged than she'd expected. During the question and answer session, portfolio managers asked detailed, technical questions about algorithm methodology, performance verification, and integration with existing investment processes. Several attendees mentioned specific challenges they were facing that InvestSmart's capabilities might address. "Miss Chun," said a man from the front row who'd introduced himself as James Patterson from Northwestern Mutual, "what would prevent a firm like yours from being acquired by a larger institution that wants to incorporate your technology into their existing operations?" It was exactly the kind of question Sarah had hoped to avoid, touching on the independence versus acquisition dilemma that had motivated her search for the right business partner in the first place. InvestSmart's effectiveness depends on maintaining the innovative flexibility that large institutional bureaucracies typically eliminate, she replied. "The algorithm requires continuous refinement adaptation that can only be done effectively by people who understand both the technical architecture and the market dynamics it's designed to analyze. But surely the potential financial returns would make acquisition attractive?" Sarah glanced toward Daniel, who was sitting in the back of the room, and gave her an encouraging nod. The potential returns from maintaining independence and building InvestSmart into a comprehensive financial technology platform are significantly greater than any acquisition offer we've received. Sometimes the best business decision is refusing to sell something that's just beginning to demonstrate its full potential. After the presentation, Sarah was surrounded by conference attendees who wanted to continue the discussion privately. She spent 2 hours in the hallway outside the conference hall, answering questions about InvestSmart's capabilities and exchanging contact information with portfolio managers who expressed serious interest in testing her analytical recommendations. Daniel eventually rescued her from the crowd, suggesting they move to a quieter location where she could continue networking without feeling overwhelmed by the attention. "That was exceptional," he said as they found seats in the hotel bar area. "You converted a room full of skeptics into potential clients. I think they were more ready to hear about technological innovation than I expected. Traditional approaches aren't working as well as they used to, and sophisticated investors are starting to recognize that." Over the next hour, several conference attendees approached their table to continue discussions about InvestSmart's analytical capabilities and potential collaboration opportunities. Sarah realized that her presentation had positioned her as a thought leader in financial technology rather than simply another startup founder seeking investment. "Sarah," said Margaret Foster, whom she recognized from Whitman Capital Management, "I'd like to schedule a formal presentation for our investment committee. We're actively seeking new analytical tools that can improve our portfolio performance." "I'd be happy to arrange that," Sarah replied, making a note in her phone. "When would work best for your team?" As Margaret walked away, Daniel leaned closer to Sarah and spoke quietly. "Do you realize what just happened? You've gone from trying to convince investors to trust your algorithm to having institutional clients actively seeking your services." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The kind of rapid growth that Daniel was describing would require exactly the resources and support that their pilot project had been designed to test. It's exciting, but also overwhelming. If even half of these potential clients decide to move forward, we'll need to scale operations much faster than I'd originally planned. Which brings us to a decision point about the pilot project. Are you ready to discuss expanding our collaboration into a full partnership? The question had been inevitable, but Sarah still felt unprepared to make such a significant commitment. The past 4 months had demonstrated that working with Daniel and Crawford and Associates provided exactly the support she needed to grow InvestSmart successfully. But it had also revealed the personal complications that came with spending so much time collaborating with someone she found increasingly attractive. "I think we need to have that conversation soon," she said carefully. "But not here, surrounded by potential clients and conference networking." "Agreed. What about dinner tomorrow night? We can discuss the business aspects privately and figure out how to handle the personal dimensions that we've both been carefully avoiding." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. They'd successfully maintained professional boundaries during the pilot project, but acknowledging that personal feelings existed while pretending they didn't affect their working relationship was becoming increasingly artificial. "That sounds like a conversation we need to have," she agreed. The next evening, Daniel chose a small Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park, far enough from Chicago's financial district to ensure privacy, but intimate enough to encourage honest conversation. Sarah arrived wearing a dress that was professional enough for business discussion, but elegant enough to acknowledge that this wasn't purely a corporate meeting. "Before we discuss business expansion," Daniel said after they'd ordered dinner, "I think we should address the personal situation that we've been professionally managing for the past 4 months." Sarah appreciated his directness, even as she felt nervous about where the conversation might lead. "What aspect of the personal situation?" The fact that we've developed feelings for each other that go beyond professional respect and intellectual compatibility. She'd known this moment was coming, but hearing Daniel articulate what they'd both been carefully avoiding still made her heart race. And how do you think we should handle that? Honestly, we're both adults who are capable of making intelligent decisions about complicated situations. The question is whether pursuing a personal relationship would enhance or compromise our business partnership. Sarah had been thinking about this question for weeks without reaching a satisfactory answer. I've always believed that mixing business and personal relationships creates unnecessary complications and potential conflicts of interest. Generally true. But there are exceptions when the personal relationship is based on genuine compatibility and shared values rather than just physical attraction or emotional convenience. Are you suggesting that what we're feeling falls into the exception category? Daniel was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. I'm suggesting that we explore the possibility while maintaining our commitment to InvestSmart's success as the top priority. Sarah realized that Daniel was proposing exactly what she'd been hoping for, but hadn't dared to suggest. A relationship that acknowledged both their professional collaboration and personal attraction without forcing a choice between them. What would that look like practically? Continued business partnership with explicit agreements about how personal relationship decisions would be handled. Clear boundaries around professional responsibilities and personal time. And honest communication about any conflicts that arise. The conversation continued through dinner and into the evening, covering everything from business expansion plans to personal relationship expectations. Sarah found herself increasingly comfortable with the idea of pursuing both professional and personal partnerships with Daniel, partly because he seemed to understand the complexities involved and committed to managing them thoughtfully. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," Daniel said as they prepared to leave the restaurant. "The business expansion we've been discussing would require significant additional investment from Crawford and Associates. I want you to know that. My recommendation to proceed is based entirely on InvestSmart's potential, not on personal feelings." "How can you be certain about that?" "Because I've been analyzing this opportunity for 6 months, and every metric supports expansion regardless of personal considerations." "You've built something remarkable, Sarah. It deserves support whether we pursue a personal relationship or not." Walking to their cars, Sarah realized that she was facing the decision she'd been avoiding since the pilot project began. She could continue maintaining careful boundaries between business and personal relationships, or she could trust that she and Daniel were capable of managing both kinds of partnerships simultaneously. "Daniel," she said as they reached her car, "I'd like to explore what you're suggesting, both the business expansion and the personal relationship." He smiled, and Sarah realized it was the first time she'd seen him look genuinely happy rather than professionally satisfied. "Are you sure?" "No, I'm terrified. But I'm also excited about the possibilities, and I think sometimes the best decisions are the ones that scare you a little." Daniel stepped closer, and Sarah felt her breath catch as she realized he was going to kiss her. When he did, it felt like the natural conclusion to months of careful attraction management and professional boundary maintenance. The kiss was gentle, but decisive, confirming everything they'd both been feeling but hadn't allowed themselves to acknowledge. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we find out whether we're as good at personal partnerships as we are at business collaboration." Daniel replied, "But I'm optimistic about our chances." As Sarah drove home, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed over the past 6 months. She'd gone from struggling to find the right business partner to developing both a successful professional collaboration and the beginning of what might become a meaningful personal relationship. The combination was complicated and potentially risky, but it also represented exactly what she'd been hoping to find when she'd started. Invest Smart. The question now was whether she could build both a revolutionary financial technology company and a lasting personal relationship with the same person, or whether success in one area would require sacrifices in the other. Either way, she was about to find out whether Daniel Crawford really was everything she'd been looking for in both a business partner and something more. Notification that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning while Sarah was reviewing quarterly projections with Kevin and Amanda. Her phone buzzed with an email from the Securities and Exchange Commission's Office of Compliance Inspections and Examinations, requesting a comprehensive audit of InvestSmart's algorithmic trading, recommendations, and client advisory processes. The formal language couldn't disguise what Sarah immediately recognized as a serious regulatory investigation that could shut down her company. "Kevin, Amanda, I need you to stop what you're doing and focus on documentation," she said, trying to keep her voice steady while her mind raced through potential implications. "The SEC wants to examine our entire operation, and we have 10 business days to prepare comprehensive records." Amanda looked up from her user interface coding with an expression of concern. "What kind of examination? Routine compliance review or something more serious?" Sarah reread the email carefully, noting specific references to algorithmic transparency, fiduciary responsibility, and potential market manipulation concerns. The language suggested someone had filed a complaint alleging that InvestSmart's recommendations constituted unlicensed investment advice or possibly fraudulent market manipulation. More serious, they're questioning whether our algorithmic recommendations qualify as investment advisory services that require SEC registration and oversight. Kevin immediately began pulling backup files and system logs while Amanda started organizing client communication records and performance documentation. Both developers understood that regulatory investigations could destroy technology companies, regardless of whether any actual violations had occurred. Sarah called Daniel, who answered on the first ring, despite the early hour. "Daniel, we have a major problem. The SEC is conducting a formal investigation of InvestSmart's operations, and they're questioning whether our algorithm constitutes unlicensed investment advisory services. I'm on my way. Don't respond to any SEC communications until we have legal representation present. Do you think this is related to our success at the investment forum? Someone who felt threatened by our technology? Possibly, but let's focus on responding appropriately rather than speculating about motivations. This is exactly the kind of challenge that requires careful legal and strategic management." Daniel arrived within 30 minutes, accompanied by Maria Santos from Crawford and Associates and 2 attorneys from a law firm that specialized in financial services regulation. Sarah briefed them on the SEC's requests while Kevin and Amanda continued organizing technical documentation that would demonstrate InvestSmart's compliance with existing regulations. "The core issue," explained Patricia Williams, the senior attorney, "is whether InvestSmart's algorithmic recommendations constitute personalized investment advice that requires SEC registration as an investment advisor. But we provide analytical tools, not specific investment recommendations," Sarah protested. "Users make their own decisions based on our market analysis. The distinction can be subtle from a regulatory perspective," Maria Santos added. "If your algorithm generates specific buy or sell recommendations for individual securities, the SEC might classify that as investment advice regardless of how it's delivered." Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized the regulatory implications of InvestSmart's most valuable features. The algorithm's ability to provide specific, actionable recommendations was exactly what distinguished it from generic market analysis tools, but it was also what made the system potentially vulnerable to investment advisor regulations. "What are options?" Daniel asked. "Demonstrate compliance with existing regulations, modify the system to eliminate potentially problematic features, or pursue SEC registration as a formal investment advisor," Patricia Williams replied. Each approach has different costs, benefits, and timeline implications. Sarah spent the next hour reviewing InvestSmart's technical architecture with the legal team, explaining how the algorithm generated recommendations and how those recommendations were communicated to users. The lawyers asked detailed questions about user interfaces, disclaimer language, and the degree of personalization in the analytical output. The good news, Patricia Williams concluded, is that your system appears to be designed with compliance considerations in mind. The disclaimers are appropriate. The recommendations are presented as analytical tools rather than investment advice, and users maintain complete control over their investment decisions. What's the bad news? Sarah asked. The CSEC investigation suggests someone has alleged that your system crosses the line into unlicensed investment advisory services. We'll need to prepare comprehensive documentation that demonstrates compliance, and possibly modify some system features to eliminate any regulatory ambiguity. Over the next week, Sarah's office became a legal preparation center with attorneys, compliance specialists, and technical experts working together to document every aspect of InvestSmart's operations. The process was exhausting and expensive, requiring detailed analysis of algorithmic methodology, user interaction protocols, and performance tracking systems. Daniel proved invaluable during the regulatory preparation, coordinating between different specialists while ensuring that Sarah could focus on the technical aspects that required her specific expertise. She found herself grateful for his business experience and legal connections, resources that would have been impossible to access as an independent startup. "How are you holding up?" he asked during a brief break in the document preparation process. "Terrified that everything I've built could be destroyed by regulatory technicalities that have nothing to do with whether the technology actually works. It's not going to be destroyed. We'll demonstrate compliance, make any necessary modifications, and ensure that InvestSmart continues operating within appropriate regulatory frameworks." Sarah appreciated his confidence, but she also recognized that the investigation had revealed how vulnerable her company was to regulatory challenges that could arise, regardless of actual wrongdoing. The realization was sobering and made her question whether independent operation was sustainable in an industry with such complex oversight requirements. "Daniel, if we get through this investigation successfully, I want to discuss formalizing our partnership permanently. The regulatory complexity alone makes it clear that InvestSmart needs institutional support to operate safely. Are you sure? A few months ago, you were determined to maintain complete independence. A few months ago, I didn't understand how many ways a successful technology company could be attacked by competitors or destroyed by regulatory misunderstandings." The SEC examination took place the following Friday in a conference room at Crawford & Associates offices, chosen because the firm's established regulatory relationships provided a more professional environment than InvestSmart's startup workspace. Sarah spent 2 days preparing for questions about algorithmic methodology, compliance procedures, and business operations. The SEC examination team consisted of 3 investigators: Robert Chun, a senior examination analyst; Linda Martinez, a technology specialist; and James Patterson, an attorney who focused on investment advisor regulations. Sarah recognized the names from various regulatory publications and industry conferences, indicating that the SEC was taking the investigation seriously. "Miss Chun," Robert Chun began, "we'd like to understand how InvestSmart's algorithm generates investment recommendations and how those recommendations are communicated to users." Sarah had prepared for this question extensively, knowing that her answer would determine whether the SEC classified her system as analytical software or unlicensed investment advice. InvestSmart analyzes market data, news sentiment, and economic indicators to identify statistical patterns and probability assessments for various securities, she explained. The system presents this analysis to users along with historical performance data. But users make all investment decisions independently, based on their own risk tolerance and investment objectives. But doesn't the algorithm provide specific buy, sell, or hold recommendations? Linda Martinez asked. The algorithm provides probability assessments and statistical analysis. The user interface translates those assessments into suggested actions, but always with clear disclaimers that users should consult with qualified investment advisors before making investment decisions. The questioning continued for 3 hours, covering everything from algorithmic transparency to client communication protocols. Sarah answered each question as thoroughly as possible while the attorneys took notes and occasionally provided clarifying information about regulatory compliance. Procedures. Miss Chun, James Patterson said as the examination was concluding, what measures has InvestSmart implemented to ensure that users understand the limitations of algorithmic analysis and the importance of independent investment decision-making? Sarah had prepared extensively for this question, knowing it addressed the core regulatory concern about whether her system was providing unlicensed investment advice. Every user interaction includes prominent disclaimers about the limitations of algorithmic analysis. New users complete educational modules about investment risk and the importance of consulting qualified advisors. And our terms of service explicitly state that InvestSmart provides analytical tools, not personalized investment advice. After the SEC team left, Sarah felt exhausted but cautiously optimistic about InvestSmart's regulatory position. The investigators had asked tough questions but hadn't suggested any obvious compliance violations or demanded immediate operational changes. How do you think it went? She asked Patricia Williams. Better than expected. They seemed satisfied with your compliance procedures and impressed by the thoroughness of your documentation. I don't think they found evidence of the investment advisor violations that someone alleged. What happens next? We wait for their formal response, which typically takes 30 to 60 days. If they don't find compliance violations, the investigation ends with a clean examination report. That evening, Daniel took Sarah to dinner at a quiet restaurant, where they could discuss the investigation's implications without concern about professional eavesdropping or client confidentiality. You were impressive during the examination, he said. Professional, knowledgeable, and completely transparent about how InvestSmart operates. I kept thinking about how different this would have been if I'd been handling it alone. The legal support, regulatory expertise, and professional presentation environment made all the difference. Which brings us back to the partnership discussion you mentioned earlier. Sarah had been thinking about this conversation since the investigation began, weighing the benefits of continued independence against the advantages of institutional support and shared resources. I want to formalize our partnership, but not just because of regulatory concerns. The past 6 months have shown me that InvestSmart can achieve much more with the right partner than it could ever accomplish independently. What kind of partnership structure are you thinking about? Full merger of InvestSmart into Crawford and Associates Technology Platform, with me as Chief Technology Officer and significant equity stake in the combined organization. Daniel was quiet for a moment, and Sarah wondered if her proposal was more or less than he'd been expecting. That's a bigger commitment than I thought you'd be comfortable with. 6 months ago, you would have been right. But I've learned that successful innovation requires not just good technology, but also regulatory expertise, business development capabilities, and institutional credibility. You and Crawford and Associates provide all of those things. And the personal relationship? How does that factor into the business decision? Sarah had been wondering about this question herself, trying to separate her growing feelings for Daniel from her assessment of InvestSmart's strategic needs. The personal relationship makes the business partnership more appealing, but it's not the determining factor. Even if we weren't personally involved, Crawford and Associates would still be the best strategic partner for InvestSmart's continued development. They spent the rest of dinner discussing merger terms, organizational structures, and implementation timelines. Sarah found herself excited about the possibilities that full partnership would create, while also nervous about giving up the complete independence she'd fought so hard to maintain. "There's one more thing I want to discuss," Daniel said as they prepared to leave the restaurant. "The personal relationship has been developing alongside our business collaboration. But if we formalize the business partnership, we need to be completely transparent about personal involvement." "What kind of transparency?" "Full disclosure to Crawford and Associates board and investors. Clear policies about how personal relationship decisions would affect business operations, and probably some legal documentation to protect both sides." "If the personal relationship doesn't work out?" Sarah appreciated his thoroughness while recognizing that mixing business and personal relationships at this level would create complexities she'd never had to navigate before. "Are you comfortable with that level of professional scrutiny of our personal relationship?" "I'm comfortable with whatever structure ensures that both the business partnership and personal relationship can succeed without compromising each other." 2 weeks later, the SEC concluded their investigation with a clean examination report that found no compliance violations or regulatory concerns. InvestSmart was cleared to continue operating with its current structure and capabilities, validating Sarah's approach to algorithmic investment analysis while providing regulatory credibility that would support future growth. The successful resolution of the SEC investigation became the catalyst for finalizing the merger between InvestSmart and Crawford and Associates. Sarah spent a month working with attorneys and business consultants to structure the deal, ensuring that she maintained creative control over algorithmic development while gaining access to institutional resources and regulatory expertise. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," she told Kevin and Amanda as they prepared to sign the final merger agreements. "A year ago, InvestSmart was just an idea and some experimental code. Now we're becoming part of a major financial technology platform. Are you excited or terrified?" Amanda asked. "Both, but mostly excited about what we'll be able to accomplish with proper resources and institutional support." The merger celebration took place at Crawford and Associates offices, with team members from both organizations gathering to mark the beginning of their expanded collaboration. Sarah found herself surrounded by colleagues who'd become friends, business partners who'd become trusted advisors, and Daniel, who'd become both her professional partner and personal romantic interest. "Sarah," Daniel said during his remarks to the assembled group, 18 months ago, you had a revolutionary idea about how artificial intelligence could transform investment analysis. Today, that idea becomes the foundation for what I believe will be the most innovative financial technology platform in the industry." As the celebration continued around her, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that first desperate meeting with Meridian Financial. She'd gone from facing the potential loss of her company to building something much larger and more impactful than she'd ever imagined possible. The combination of business success and personal happiness felt almost too good to be true. But Sarah had learned to trust in the possibility that sometimes the right opportunities and the right people came together at exactly the right time. Whether that would continue to be true remained to be seen, but for now, she was exactly where she wanted to be, building innovative technology with someone who understood both her professional ambitions and her personal dreams. 1 year after the merger that transformed InvestSmart from an independent startup into the technological heart of Crawford Financial Analytics, Sarah stood before the Federal Reserve's Financial Technology Advisory Committee in Washington, D.C., presenting her research on artificial intelligence applications in systemic risk assessment. The invitation to address the nation's top financial regulators represented recognition that her work had evolved beyond commercial success into something that could influence the stability of the entire Financial system. The committee room buzzed with quiet conversations between Federal Reserve governors, Treasury Department officials, and representatives from major financial institutions. Sarah recognized several faces from financial news, broadcasts, and regulatory publications, people whose decisions affected global markets and economic policy. The opportunity to present InvestSmart's expanded capabilities to this audience was both thrilling and intimidating. Dr. Chun, said Federal Reserve Governor Patricia Stone, your research suggests that artificial intelligence systems can identify systemic risks that traditional analysis might miss. Can you explain how this capability would work in practice? Sarah had prepared extensively for this question, knowing that regulators were particularly concerned about AI systems that could potentially destabilize markets rather than improve them. The key insight is that systemic risks emerge from complex interactions between multiple market participants, regulatory environments, and economic conditions, she explained, pulling up visualizations on the committee room's presentation system. Traditional risk assessment focuses on individual institutions or asset classes, but our AI system analyzes interconnected patterns across the entire financial ecosystem. The presentation continued for 45 minutes, with Sarah demonstrating how her expanded algorithm could process regulatory filings, market transactions, international economic data, and even social media sentiment to identify emerging threats to financial stability. The system had successfully predicted 3 separate market corrections over the past year, providing advance warning that allowed institutional investors to adjust their positions before losses occurred. This is fascinating work, commented Treasury Secretary Michael Richardson, but I'm concerned about the implications of AI systems that can predict market movements with such accuracy. Could these capabilities be used to manipulate markets rather than stabilize them? Sarah had anticipated this concern and prepared detailed explanations of the ethical frameworks and regulatory oversight mechanisms built into her system. That's exactly why we've developed comprehensive transparency protocols and regulatory reporting systems. Every prediction is documented, every data source is verified, and every recommendation includes detailed explanations of the analytical reasoning involved. After the presentation, Sarah was approached by several committee members who wanted to continue the discussion privately. She spent 2 hours in smaller meetings, answering specific questions about technical methodology, regulatory compliance, and potential applications for government economic policy. Dr. Chun, said Federal Reserve Governor Robert Martinez during one of these conversations, would you be interested in consulting with the Federal Reserve on developing early warning systems for financial stability monitoring? The invitation was unexpected, but represented exactly the kind of institutional recognition that Sarah had never imagined when she was struggling to find investors for her original startup. I'd be honored to contribute to financial stability research, she replied, though any consulting work would need to be coordinated with Crawford Financial Analytics. Flying back to Chicago that evening, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her professional life had changed since the merger. InvestSmart's technology now served over 200 institutional clients, managing analysis for more than $50 billion in investment assets. The expanded platform had exceeded even Daniel's ambitious projections, generating revenue that supported continued research and development while providing returns that satisfied Crawford and Associates investors. But the business success was only part of the transformation. Sarah's personal relationship with Daniel had evolved alongside their professional collaboration, creating a partnership that encompassed both their shared work and their individual growth. They'd learned to navigate the complexities of mixing business and romance by establishing clear boundaries, maintaining open communication, and prioritizing mutual respect over romantic convenience. Daniel met her at O'Hare Airport, something he'd started doing whenever her travel schedule brought her back late at night. The gesture was both practical and romantic, representing the kind of thoughtful support that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "How did the Federal Reserve presentation go?" he asked as they walked toward the parking garage. "Better than I could have hoped. They're interested in consulting arrangements for systemic risk monitoring, and several governors mentioned potential research collaborations. That's incredible recognition for the work you've accomplished. 2 years ago, you were worried about convincing individual investors to trust your algorithm. Now federal regulators want to use your technology to monitor the entire financial system." Sarah realized that Daniel was right about the remarkable scope of her professional evolution. The algorithm that had started as a tool for improving individual investment decisions had grown into something that could influence national economic policy. "I couldn't have achieved any of this without the partnership we built," she said. The resources, expertise, and institutional credibility that Crawford and Associates provided made all the difference. The technology and vision were yours. We just provided support for implementing your ideas at scale. They drove through downtown Chicago, passing the converted warehouse where InvestSmart had operated as an independent startup. The building now housed several other technology companies, continuing the cycle of innovation and entrepreneurship that had given Sarah her start. "Daniel," she said as they approached her apartment building, "I've been thinking about our long-term plans, both professional and personal." "What kind of thinking?" "The Federal Reserve consulting opportunity would require spending significant time in Washington. The research would be fascinating, but it would also mean less involvement in day-to-day operations at Crawford Financial Analytics." Daniel parked the car and turned to face her directly. "Are you considering accepting the consulting position?" "I'm considering how to balance multiple opportunities that all represent things I want to accomplish. Professional challenges that utilize my expertise, continued development of commercial applications, and personal relationships that matter to me. What would ideal balance look like?" Sarah had been thinking about this question during her flight home, weighing different possibilities for structuring her career and personal life over the next several years. Part-time consulting with the Federal Reserve, continued oversight of algorithm development at Crawford Financial Analytics, and enough personal time to build the kind of relationship with you that could last beyond our professional collaboration. Daniel smiled, and Sarah realized he'd been hoping she would find a way to pursue multiple goals simultaneously rather than choosing between them. "That sounds like exactly the kind of complex challenge you're best at solving." They walked up to Sarah's apartment, where she'd prepared dinner before leaving for Washington that morning. The routine of cooking together had become one of their favorite ways of transitioning from professional discussions to personal conversation. "There's something else I want to discuss," Sarah said as they sat down to eat. "The success we've achieved, both professionally and personally, has made me think about what I want our relationship to become long-term." "What conclusions have you reached?" "That I want to find out whether what we've built together can evolve into something permanent. Not just business partnership, but life partnership." Daniel was quiet for a moment, and Sarah wondered if she'd moved too quickly from professional planning to personal commitment. "Sarah, I've been hoping you'd reach that conclusion, but I didn't want to pressure you while you were still adjusting to all the professional changes." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've known for months that I want to marry you, but I wanted to be sure you'd found the right balance between career ambitions and personal relationships before suggesting that level of commitment." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized that Daniel was essentially proposing marriage during a conversation about career planning and Federal Reserve consulting opportunities. "Are you actually proposing right now?" Daniel laughed, and Sarah realized he looked nervous for the first time since she'd known him. "I'm realizing that I should have planned this conversation more carefully. But yes, I'm asking whether you'd be interested in making our partnership permanent in every sense." "Daniel Crawford, are you asking me to marry you in the middle of a discussion about Washington consulting opportunities?" Sarah Chun, I'm asking you to marry me because I can't imagine building a future without you, professionally or personally. The consulting opportunities just provide context for planning what that future might look like. Sarah realized that Daniel's proposal was exactly like everything else about their relationship: practical, thoughtful, and perfectly timed to coincide with major life decisions. Yes, she said, but I want a proper engagement ring and a celebration that doesn't involve financial projections or Federal Reserve policy discussions. I can arrange that, Daniel replied, producing a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. I've been carrying this around for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. The engagement ring was elegant without being ostentatious, featuring a single diamond surrounded by smaller stones in a setting that managed to be both classic and contemporary. Sarah realized that Daniel had chosen something that reflected her personality: perfectly sophisticated, beautiful, and designed for someone who used her hands for detailed technical work. It's perfect, she said as Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger. Though I'm impressed by your confidence, that I'd say yes. I wasn't confident about timing, but I was confident about compatibility. We've tested this partnership under every kind of stress and challenge imaginable. 6 months later, they married in a ceremony at the Art Institute of Chicago. During her toast, Dr. Rachel Thompson said, Sarah spent months insisting she needed a business partner, not romance. I'm glad she discovered the best partnerships include both. 3 years later, Sarah reviewed quarterly reports showing continued growth. The company now employed over 200 people with offices in Chicago, New York, and Washington. InvestSmart had evolved into a comprehensive platform, serving everyone from individual investors to central banks. Daniel appeared with coffee and good news. The Federal Reserve approved funding for your systemic risk monitoring project. 2-year contract with renewal options. Sometimes I can't believe how far we've come from that first dinner about business partnerships, Sarah said. You had a revolutionary idea and the determination to see it through, Daniel replied. As they planned the expansion, Sarah reflected on her journey. She'd started seeking sustainable business success and achieved much more professional recognition, institutional impact, and a relationship that enhanced rather than compromised her ambitions. Marrying my business partner was the best decision I ever made, she told Daniel. Even better than developing the algorithm? The algorithm was good technology. Marrying you was good life planning. That evening, driving home together, Sarah realized she'd found something she hadn't known she was seeking. Not just business success, but a partnership that made both individual achievement and shared happiness possible. She'd set out to find a business partner and discovered that the best partnerships encompass much more than professional collaboration. Sometimes the most important innovations weren't technological breakthroughs, but new ways of combining relationships to create something more valuable than the sum of its parts. Sarah had proven it was possible to find exactly what you needed, even when you weren't sure what you were looking for in the first place. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.